Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a huge one. We're going to take a tour of one of the biggest, most important ideas in all of philosophy: justice. I mean, it's a word we throw around constantly, right? But what does it really mean?
And the philosopher John Rawls, well, he just nailed it. He said justice isn't just some lofty, abstract concept. No, it's the first virtue of our social institutions. It's the bedrock, the foundation that everything else, our laws, our economy, our whole society is built on.
Okay, so a first virtue, but what does that actually mean for you and me? That's exactly what we're going to get into. The goal here is to unpack this whole idea and give you a kind of mental toolkit, a way to think about justice that's way clearer and more organized. All right, let's do it. To really get our feet on the ground, we need a starting point. And we're going to begin our tour with a definition that has, get this, stood the test of time for almost 1,500 years. That's some serious staying power. This definition comes all the way from ancient Roman law, and it's just this: the constant and perpetual will to render to each his due. Now, to render to each his due, it sounds so simple, doesn't it? But trust me, those few words are packed with power. They are the absolute foundation for pretty much every single conversation we have about justice, even today. So let's really dig into that definition, because it packs a serious punch. If we start to unpack it, it's kind of like unfolding a map. And on this map, there are 4 key landmarks, 4 core features that really help us understand the whole territory of justice. Okay, pillar number 1, individual claims. At its core, justice is about how individual people are treated. Second, enforceable obligation. What's just isn't a gift or charity you have to beg for. Nope, it's a due. It's a right that you can actually demand. Third, impartiality. This one's huge. Justice demands that the rules get applied consistently, to everyone, no favorites, no arbitrary decisions. And finally, number 4, agency. This is a subtle but crucial one. An outcome can only be called unjust if an agent, a person, an institution, caused it. Think about it. A hurricane hitting a city isn't unjust. It's a natural disaster, a tragedy. But the response to that hurricane, oh yeah, that can absolutely be just or unjust. So, we've got our map, we've got our landmarks. But here's where it gets really interesting. Even with this map, you start to see these deep cracks, these fault lines running right through the concept. Justice, it turns out, isn't just one simple thing. It has these fundamental tensions inside it, pulling it in completely different directions. Let's take a look at 2 of the biggest fault lines. So, first up, you have this clash between corrective justice and distributive justice. Corrective justice is pretty straightforward. It's about fixing a wrong. Bill steals Alice's laptop. Corrective justice says Bill has to give it back or compensate her. It's a two-way street. Wrongdoer, victim. Easy. But distributive justice? That's about sharing stuff out. Imagine we have, a box of flutes to give to a class. Who gets one? The most talented players? The ones who can't afford their own? The kids who tried the hardest? See, that's a completely different kind of problem. It's not about fixing a wrong, it's about a fair allocation. And that leads us right into the next big tension: process versus outcome. Or, to get a little fancier, procedural versus substantive justice. The best way to get this is the classic cake-cutting example. How do you make sure 2 people split a cake fairly? Well, you create a perfect process. You say, okay, you cut the cake, but the other person gets to choose their slice first. What does that do? It forces the cutter to make the slices as equal as humanly possible. It's genius, right? A fair process guarantees a fair outcome. But in the real world, a fair process doesn't always lead to a result that feels fair. And that's where things get complicated. Okay, so we've got these core features and these deep tensions. Our next stop on the tour is to look at the really ambitious attempts by philosophers to solve this. They tried to build these grand, unified theories, one single system that could resolve all these tensions and explain all of justice. Let's see how that went. First step, we have utilitarianism. And on the surface, this one sounds really good. It's super simple and intuitive. The idea is that justice is just whatever action or rule creates the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. It's like a big moral calculator, right? You just add up all the happiness, subtract all the suffering, and the most just choice is the one with the highest final score. Yeah, but if you follow that logic, you end up in some really weird places. Let me introduce you to the utility monster. This is a classic thought experiment. Imagine there's a person, the monster, who gets 100 times more pleasure from eating a cookie than anyone else. Well, a pure utilitarian would have to conclude that the just thing to do is to give all the cookies to the monster. Because, hey, that maximizes the total happiness in the world, even if the rest of us get nothing. Now, does that feel just to you? Probably not.
And that right there is the fundamental problem with utilitarianism as a theory of justice. It's obsessed with the grand total, the aggregate happiness, but it can completely ignore individual rights. It doesn't care how that happiness is distributed. And it really struggles with that core feeling we all have, that it's wrong to sacrifice one person for the greater good of the many. That's a huge blind spot. So if the greatest good idea has problems, what's next? Well, that brings us to theory number 2. Contractarianism. And the approach here is totally different. It asks you to perform a thought experiment. Imagine we could all hit the reset button and design society from scratch. We're all in a room together, trying to agree on the basic rules. Whatever principles we all, as free and rational people, would agree to, that's justice. And the most famous and powerful version of this idea comes from that same philosopher, John Rawls. He called it the veil of ignorance. So imagine you're in that room designing society, but you're behind this veil. You have no idea who you're going to be when you emerge. You don't know if you'll be rich or poor, healthy or sick, talented or not so talented. You could end up being anyone. Now, what kind of rules would you choose? You'd have a pretty powerful, selfish reason to make the rules as fair as possible for everyone, especially for the people at the very bottom, because, hey, that could be you.
It's a brilliant idea, but there's a big challenge here too. The whole setup, it can feel a little bit rigged, can't it? I mean, to get a just outcome from the thought experiment, you have to design the starting point, the veil of ignorance, to be perfectly fair. So it raises this tricky question. Is it the contracts that's doing the hard work of creating justice, or are we just baking our own pre-existing ideas about fairness into the starting conditions? It can feel like a bit of a circular argument. Okay, so our third and final grand theory taps into what is probably the most powerful and common intuition we have about justice, that at its very core, justice is about equality. Simple enough, right? Well, no, because that idea immediately opens up a massive can of worms. The big question becomes, equality of what? Because think about it, simple equality, just giving everyone the exact same stuff, that doesn't feel quite right either, does it? It totally ignores things like effort and choice and responsibility. So philosophers came up with a much more sophisticated version, something called luck egalitarianism. And the idea here is that justice should try to correct for inequalities that come from brute luck, stuff you have zero control over, like being born with a disability or the family you were born into. But it should allow for inequalities that result from the responsible choices people make. Sounds pretty good in theory, but in practice, wow, it's almost impossibly difficult. How on earth do you draw a clean line between brute luck and personal choice? Let's say a brilliant surgeon works incredibly hard. Is that all choice? Or was her ability to work that hard influenced by the brute luck of being born with incredible focus and intelligence? It's a real mess to try and untangle. Plus, this whole idea clashes head-on with another really strong intuition we have about justice, that people deserve unequal rewards for unequal contributions. So, we've taken this quick tour through these 3 grand theories. All of them are brilliant, all of them are powerful, and all of them are ultimately flawed. So where does that leave us? What's the big takeaway from our journey? Well, the conclusion, and it's a pretty stark one after centuries of the smartest people in history thinking about this, is that no single comprehensive theory of justice is available to us. There just isn't one grand theory that works in every situation and that can capture everything we feel and think about what's fair. And what that means is that justice is, in the end, deeply contextual. Think about it. The principles of fairness you use inside your own family are totally different from the principles of justice we need in a courtroom, right? And those are different, again, from what we might think is just for the entire global economy. Different contexts seem to call for different kinds of justice. So I'll leave you with this final question to take with you. Our tour might be over, but the next time you hear someone, or maybe even yourself, demanding justice, I want you to pause and ask, which version are you actually asking for? Are you talking about corrective justice, getting what you're due, or distributive justice, getting a fair share? Are you focused on a fair process or the best overall outcome? Because knowing which kind of justice you're really talking about, that is the first and most important step to having a real conversation. Thanks for joining me on the tour.